So today's or this week's design topic is color theory, something that may seem like really simple, but it's also something that can be, if done well in your design, then it can honestly make a big difference. And we'll go over a few examples of that. So yeah, let's get started with some basic terminology. Some common words you'll hear is hue, value, and saturation. You might also see the abbreviation as like HVS, HSV, whatever you want. So hue is essentially what a color is: blue, red, purple, pink, all of that fun stuff. And then you have value, which is how bright a color is. As you can see on this scale, you can see value is just like top to bottom. And then saturation is how intense a color is. So it's like left to right. This is a great way to see it. If you ever have seen like a desaturated photo, if you're ever editing photos, if you're moving the saturation down, you see like the colors kind of get like really muted. So you can see that on the left shift, where like in the middle, if that's like our color, we can increase the saturation a little more and it makes it brighter. And then if we decrease the saturation, it kind of makes it lighter. And then another thing is for the hue. If you add white, then it basically makes like a tint. And then if you add black to a color, then it makes a shade. So now, how do you pick which colors to use? So I'm sure you guys have seen the color wheel. It's made of primary, secondary, and tertiary colors. So just your typical colors, I guess. But some things you want to know is that the colors have a bunch of relationships with one another. So complementary is essentially just opposite colors. So for example, on this example, it's blue and an orange. Triadic is like three colors that are equally spaced that kind of form a triangle. So in this case, it's like blue, and then it's like yellow orange and like a burgundy color at the top. And then analogous is just side-by-side colors, any three colors that are kind of next to each other. So like purple, blues, that's kind of like similar looking colors, but as long as you use these relationships well in any color palette, you can create a really cool design. Here are some other ones. You can look into it, but for the most part, any good color palette would utilize some form of these relationships. There's a lot of color palette generators online. This one's colors.muse.li, but my personal favorite is coolers.co. This is like, I personally use this for all my projects. If I ever need a color palette, I kind of just like use the spacebar, go through it until I find one I like. Or like if you like a color, but you can't necessarily you don't like the other colors, you can like save a color and then it like refreshes the other one. So I personally really like colors.co for any color palette choosing stuff. There's also gradients.io, which is always fun if you're looking to have like a gradient background in your website. So definitely, if you want to check this out, very cool stuff. So now let's kind of put together what we learned from the terminology to the color wheel. So this is the color wheel a little more broken down. So at the very top, we have our hue, which is just our pure colors of the color wheel. If we add white, we get tints, which can kind of be seen as like pastels or just like the little lighter colors. And then after that, we have our tones. So anything that has our pure color, white, and then a little bit of black. And then you get to shades, which is just our hue and black. Any questions so far? Field colors are very simple, but also can have a lot of impact on design. So let's get started into some more examples. It's all about the vibes. So for example, if you've ever seen red used in a lot of design projects, for example, DoorDash or Tinder, it basically, red is a very emotionally evoking color, and it connects your brain to think, oh, I want to order that pizza on DoorDash. It's like midnight, but you're like grinding a project and you're like, I really want pizza. So you're just like, DoorDash is red. And your brain kind of sees like, oh, wow, that's like kind of looking appealing right now. It's also kind of the same thing with Tinder, where you're like swiping, looking for love, it'd be like that. So yeah, you can use it red for anything that kind of expresses strong or bold emotions in design. You guys have also probably seen red if it's ever like cancel order, disable card for this example, anything that's very bright and strong. This is kind of when you want to use red. On the opposite side, you have blue, which is very reliable and calm. And you see a lot of banks use it actually, like PayPal, Visa, Chase. Honestly, a lot of like anything dealing with money, I find that they really tend to use blue. It's because it's very neutral color that is easier on the eyes than like a red or yellow. And it's very suitable for just general purpose things. And oftentimes people say it like builds trust and rapport with their users, which is kind of why PayPal or like Visa uses it. Zoom is also blue, and many people associate blue as a very blue Zoom as a very reliable, like it's like your go-to if you want to ever like video chat, like for like meetings and stuff. Yellow is a very bright color. It's very in your face. If you're ever browsing on Amazon and you find yourself just clicking the add to cart button like mindlessly, because same, it's part to do with the reason why they make it yellow, because it pops out against kind of like the white background, and it's like, oh, it's very like, oh, very easy to click. Add to cart. It's very attention grabbing, vibrant, and is often used in association with trendiness and quick decision making, which is also why, if you guys remember like BuzzFeed like 2010s, kind of like, I don't know what these called buttons, but these are like very like associated with like BuzzFeed, and they're like really pops out. I feel like when I was into BuzzFeed at the time, I just remember seeing these everywhere. But yeah, here's some more practical applications and tips in web design. So contrast is a really big thing that when you're ever designing something, you want to pay attention to. Contrast is essentially like the difference between like the brightness between two colors. So this is an example of what you don't want to do. As you can see, like every time it switches, the brightness is kind of similar to one another, and it's very like jarring on the eyes. You can't really read what this like tiny text says. And honestly, it's just not very appealing visually. A good way to check your to see if your colors have good contrast is if you want to desaturate them completely. Accessibles-colors.com is a great resource to use, and you can compare their grayscale values and see, oh, is this accessible? Because another thing about contrast is a lot of times if people have color blindness, for example, they can't really see the contrast between the colors. So this is really important if you're ever designing something for a product that's going to be out for like everyone to see, and you want to make sure that it's accessible to everyone. So here's a GIF of like different colors and when you desaturate them. So in the first one, you can see the contrast isn't that good. And then you change it and the contrast is a lot better, especially in the square in the background. So you kind of want to have this if you're ever having a bright background with like light colored text on top. You want to make sure that that text is still like you can still read it on top of that background. And like another note, no one actually uses pure black in what like when you're designing. It's just because black is very, very heavy on the eyes, and even in our slides, we don't use pure black. A lot of our font is like just like a really dark gray or like just shades of gray. It's just much easier on the eyes because if everything is just like black text, it's all coming at you, and that black like sucks in like light, so we don't want that. So now that we kind of covered like a few examples, what kind of colors to use, and like some traits associated with that, we have the perfect color scheme. So here's a little example. We have two shades of blue, a green, like complementary color, yellow, red, all that stuff. And now we want to build an app. Here, if you're just using these 5 colors purely on just these 5, this is what an app might look like. But does anyone want to tell me what might be wrong with like the user interface of this? You can just say anything that's on your mind. I see a hand, the green hoodie. Skylar?
The triangle isn't a triangle.
Good point. I would say like, yeah, it's like the relationship between the colors might be a little too much. Any other observations? Yeah, I agree. There's not a lot of good contrast. As you can see, like the text, like the blue text, like behind this very bright yellow background, it's like a lot. And also remember how we talked about yellow is a very bright, attractive color that kind of grabs your attention. But it's being used like a little too much here. So here's an example of how you would use this color palette to create an app like this, but more accessible and a lot more nicer in design. So a lot of times you might see like white and like variations of black and grays are used in like any kind of user interface, because white is really easy just to pair with any color essentially, because that's just like hue, not hue, sorry, like a saturation thing. So the main background for our like chat box here, I guess, is white, but everything else on top is like very easy to read. You see the text and the little like profile pics are like much more out there, but we still utilize that same color scheme. Notice how we still use that blue, but in order to highlight what channel we're using, we use that dark blue just to have it. And then the teal color that we had is used for like little notifications, and a little up here, that red, instead of having like a whole banner that was red, we kind of had it like a little notification bubble up top. And then here for a little like banner that was red previously, we have it as like this kind of muted yellow. So we use like basically this original yellow color, but we kind of desaturated or made it into a tint that was a little more easy on the eyes. And it's still noticeable. You can still see like, oops, sorry, there seems to be a problem with your connection, but it's not as like out there to the eyes, and kind of it breaks down your app into something more readable. Any questions on that so far? Like why we design it this way? Awesome. And just we have a few more slides to go through, but essentially when you're creating your website, you want to match your color scheme with your images if you can. It just makes it seem like a little more cohesive. So here you can see how we have our main photo for our hero section. It's like these like brown, yellowy colors, but we also kind of have that here as well in this middle picture with the couch. And then we kind of use like similar colors, not necessarily like similar, but like kind of complementary in that way that we talked about color relationships. But that basically brings us to the end of our color theory design lecture. Did anyone have any last questions before I put up the attendance? All right. Okay, I stop recording. Stop.